and welcome to WRPB and WRPB Studios. You know, we live in such a tough world, and it's not getting any easier. And sometimes people fall into, for lack of a better word, bad habits that become controlling of their lives. With me is Stephanie and Justin from Agape on the Treasure Coast, I guess?
Yes,
Okay. And at your treatment center?
we are.
Okay. You know, here's the scenario, because most of my viewers know that I've never been in that scenario. Sure, I have a ton of other issues, okay, like we all do. But people come to you, do they come to you when they're ready? I mean, that makes the difference, I guess, in a treatment center, right? People need to be ready to take control of what's wrong.
Yeah, I think we see people come to us when they're ready, right? When they've reached their bottom, so to speak. But we also have individuals come to us who maybe their family has given them an ultimatum saying, we need you to get help in order for you to remain in this house. So it's a wide range of people who come to us.
Does that, okay, so Mary, I'm just picking a name out of my hat, okay, decides that I'm at my lowest point, I gotta get better. Is she a better person to work with than Mary, whose family says, hey, if you don't get better, you're out of this house? Who has a better chance of making it, Justin? In your just opinion, really.
I think that's kind of an unfair question.
Why?
Because they both have an equal chance to make it.
Okay.
Somebody may be more willing in the beginning, and somebody that may not be as willing just might need more love.
Okay.
And that's why we try to provide that, at Agape. We try to love them until they can love themselves.
Stephanie, why'd you get into this?
Truly just because I have a desire to help people. I went through my own life experiences,
Okay.
and I really believe that we're all worthy and deserving of living a healthy, happy life, and I want to be a part of that process for people.
What about you, Justin?
So I struggled with addiction in my younger years. At 14, I was in a car accident and I was prescribed opiates, and it kicked off an addiction. And I also have a lot of childhood trauma in my story. And once I got sober, I had this passion to help others, so I pursued this field.
You know, it's interesting. We were talking in the green room, and I said I found my second wife overdosed from legal drugs. When I met her years prior, she was drinking, and she gave up alcohol for 8 years. Got in a car accident, became a legal drug addict, and overdosed on the legal drugs that were given to her. So it could be dangerous, I guess, if you have that addictive personality, okay, to take any other kind of medicines, correct?
Correct.
How long are you around the industry?
I've been doing this for a decade now.
Really?
Yes.
5 years.
Okay. The people that you meet, okay, do most of them want to get better, or do they feel like they're kind of pushed into trying to get better?
Personally, I believe deep down there's a part of every single person who wants to get better. They might not know that, but I feel like that's the work of us. We're there to guide them to that place within themselves to realize that they have a desire to get better.
Okay, so Agape, a treatment center for what? What addictions and stuff do you treat?
We are a dual diagnosis program, which means we have the opportunity to treat people struggling with addiction and mental health. And we offer all levels of care, starting at the detox level all the way down to the lower levels like intensive outpatient and outpatient.
All right, so I have a problem. I don't. I have a bunch of problems, but that's not one of them. Okay, so I have a problem. Let's say I have an addiction and I want to get better. What's my first step?
You would reach out to our admissions line, and
Okay.
there's a person who's going to be on the phone who's going to walk you through the entire process.
What's the admissions number? Do you know it off the top of your head? I think it's on the screen.
It's on the
and
screen,
It'll be on the
yes.
screen. Yeah, you know what's really weird? Because today we don't remember any numbers anymore. Everything's in our phone.
Yeah.
All right, so I call admissions. What's going to be their first step with me on the phone?
It depends. If you're calling saying, hi, I've been struggling with active addiction and I really need help, they're going to guide you to our detox program. And so you would start at the detox level of care. But let's say you're a person who's like, hey, I have 30 days clean, but I feel like I'm on the verge of relapse. Then they're going to get you into the lower level, which is called day, night, or partial hospitalization, and even in some cases, intensive outpatient.
Okay, so I hear the word sponsor. Okay, and I kind of get that, because that's in life in general. We all need a sponsor, mentor, sponsor, call it what you will. When you give up the thought that when you think that you can do it all on your own, and I'm not just talking, just life in general, you're already on a bad path, in my opinion. Okay? I think we all need someone to vent to throw ideas off of, and to kind of save us when we feel like we're going off the deep end. When you guys bring in somebody and start working with them, and again, I'm talking from an ignorant part here, there is a time period from the minute they start that they should stay out of relationships.
We recommend this.
Okay.
Yes.
The reason being?
Want to answer?
Yeah.
Sure. So they're very fragile in like the first year of sobriety, and they're making a lot of personal changes within themselves. They're healing. They're dealing with unresolved trauma, so they're very vulnerable. And in that stage, if they were to take their eyes off of their recovery and maybe focus on a relationship, they might kind of, maybe have some codependency issues because they haven't healed from that trauma. But it might make them focus more on the relationship than the recovery, which can possibly lead to a relapse.
When I hear it from my side, it's like, well, you get back in a relationship, and 90% of the people you're going to deal with is going to say, hey, let's go for a drink, or hey, let's go to the bar. And it's like taking a kid to a candy store in the very beginning, I guess, until you're able to say, I can go, it's not going to affect me. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't have that, but I have an addiction, and we were talking to a donut, okay? And that's my trigger. So, I had a heart attack and triple bypass, okay? So I'm now fighting every day, because every day is a fight, not to eat the sugars and stuff. I'm guessing within addiction, it's the same scenario. Is every day, especially in the beginning, got to be a fight.
Absolutely.
Okay? Mm-hmm. And we deal in life with peer pressure. Okay, is that like something that you really need to avoid?
Yeah, well, they say change people, places, and things, right? And I think early in recovery, it's absolutely necessary. We often talk about find your people, right? Find your people who are safe, who are supportive, who you're going to feel safe within that network of people. And this is why we recommend 12-step programs and fellowship, things like that. Okay,
what about the person that comes in and they're all over the world that are very argumentative, okay, and say, yeah, this is not going to work, da-da-da-da. Are they all, they're already jinxing themselves, I believe, right, Justin?
Well, I like to look for the source, right?
Okay.
So usually somebody that might be a little bit more standoffish and resistant in the very beginning, maybe they have a lot of unhealed trauma, and maybe they have a lot of trust issues, maybe they've been hurt a lot in their childhood. So I try to look for the source of what it is and why they're so resistant, right? Then I can kind of have some common ground to work with them and start to build trust.
Is it, and I could be wrong, it's just how I think, because of what I've been through. So I'm a survivor of sexual abuse as a kid.
Sure.
Are many of the people that get into drugs and alcohol survivors of sex, or trying to survive that trauma of being sexually abused as a kid?
We believe that every single person who's struggling with addiction or mental health has unresolved trauma, and that trauma has manifested in their case as addiction, as a way of coping.
Okay. Meaning being abused?
Could be physically abused, sexually abused, emotionally abused, verbally abused. Maybe just grew up in a home where your parents were so busy that they weren't there for you. They neglected your needs, even just your emotional needs.
Yes.
What about, and we're talking about addictive personalities. What about the person who doesn't have those issues, but has got involved because of peer pressure? Does that happen a lot? Like, hey, all my friends in school did it, it's okay for me. Does that happen a lot?
Well, I think, once again, it would go back to the trauma, because if somebody's easily influenced, right, and they're going to do something as harmful as drugs or possibly alcohol, right, what is the reason that they're so easily persuaded? Right? Are they struggling with low self-esteem, self-worth? And therefore, once again, to me, it would go probably to some kind of unresolved trauma.
Right. It's like they often want to fit in, or they don't want to be rejected. There's
Right.
that fear around that.
So is that part of the dual diagnosis, if I get that right, of the mental health part, dealing with emotional issues?
Yeah, so oftentimes people who are struggling with addiction or alcoholism, they have a coexisting response, which is anxiety, depression, bipolar, even some of the heavier diagnoses like schizophrenia.
It's funny. It's a strange world we live in, okay? And you walk in and we're talking, I look at the thing, and we have a common connection,
Yeah.
okay? And I think we all have common connections with people. And those guys who watch know that Jules was on the air with me, and her story was pretty amazing to me, even though I didn't fall into her thing. Are those stories the majority or the minority? Meaning, do more people make it through, or is it really a hard road to hoe and people are going to fall off the wagon, for lack of a better word. And that's not a bad thing. The bad thing is not getting back on the wagon, I think. Is that correct?
I would say relapse is absolutely part of the process. It's not a requirement, right? So it really depends on the individual and their needs and their struggles, and also their access to resources. Yeah. That's a really big part.
Okay, so if the country goes through a trauma situation and things are closed up and people can't get to resources, okay, what would the answer be? Well, part of it, I guess, would be we're blessed that we have phones and stuff like that. I think, am I right in saying that the key to make it, if you can't get that base resource, is to have a sponsor?
Well, I would say it could be a sponsor for some people if they're in like a 12-step fellowship. For some people, it could be a therapist. Some people, it could be a support group. And that's what we try to do, is we try to nurture them to follow some kind of recovery program where they have a support network.
And again, that group, that support network, really, to me, is probably the key for people staying clean and sober.
Yes, there's this quote, and we live by it. It says the opposite of addiction is connection.
Yes.
And that really, that says it all.
Okay. Mm-hmm. It's also the problem of addiction sometimes could be connection.
It could be. Okay? It's the wrong connection.
Yes.
The wrong connection.
Yeah.
My second wife had it a little easier because I don't drink. So in my house, there was no alcohol. Okay, so and addiction, I don't want to say it's like a snowflake, but it was so weird to me because her addiction was beer. She could drink a Long Island iced tea. She could drink 2 or 3. She might feel high and stuff. That's it. When she drank beer, she couldn't stop, and she was violent and nasty. So do different drugs and different alcohols affect people differently?
Yes. Yes, we see it all the time. Oftentimes our clients will say, well, I don't have a problem with drinking. My problem is drugs, so I think I can drink. Sure. But what happens is that is a gateway that usually leads the person back to their drug of choice. Okay.
You use the word gateway. Okay. So when you go to the drug scenario, is marijuana a gateway to other drugs?
We've seen it, yes.
Okay. And I spoke, everybody knows I've never even tried smoking pot. I believe that everything is a gateway, depending on how you handle it. So why make that choice if you know it's so bad? Okay, and don't get mad at me, guys, okay? But I was told, or I know, that when you go through recovery, sometimes you switch one addiction for another. Okay? So you replace your addiction, because to me, life is a series of voids, and you try to fill as many as you can. And if there's some that are open, you fill it with something. Okay? So if your addiction was alcohol, and you get rid of it, then you try to fill it with something else. Most times that I've seen, and I could be wrong, you can correct me because you guys are the experts, when you are a drug addict, you replace it with cigarettes.
Yeah, and this is why, I love that you use the word voids, because that's really what it's about. Mm-hmm. And so that's why our entire program is designed around helping our guests figure out what are the voids, right? Let's name them. Let's figure that out. Let's offer love there, healing there. And once a person is really in touch with what we call, it's like that invisible wound, they're less likely to fill it with something outside of themselves, whether it's food, sex, porn, gambling, cigarettes, vaping, drugs, alcohol, another human being, right? Relationships. Yeah. We see this happen all the time.
Okay, so, and I try to look at it when you talk, and I'm trying to figure out the pieces, because for me, even at my old age, I try to learn something new every day. And it's not something that I really know, even though I've done a ton of interviews with people who've been through it. The question is, can you ever get to a point, let's say you're an alcoholic, can you ever get to a point where you say, yeah, I can have 1 drink or 2 drinks?
I don't know. I don't know that I would answer that. I think that it's all about one's ability to choose sobriety now, right? One now at a time.
Okay. I get it with drugs. Hey, you know what? I've been clean and sober for 5 years. Big deal if I smoke a joint. No, I can't. Don't you understand that you did that already? You smoked that first joint, which took you down this path. You had that first beer, that ended up taking you down this path. Why would you even consider that? But we're in a day and age where, look, we're in Florida. Medical marijuana has become legal. It only passed because of recreational users, because there wasn't enough medical people to get that law passed, and that's a fact. So it was all the other people that kicked in that hoped that it would get passed, and then we could take it to the next step. And I get steps, because everything is a step. For me, it should have been decriminalized more than made legal. Because if it does have a benefit, and I'm not saying it does, I'm not a doctor, if it does have a benefit for seizures, and your kid does seizures, you don't care if you get a $50 fine to keep your kid from not having a seizure, if that's the fact. But what's happening to now is everything is about instant gratification. Okay? So everything you see is about, hey, go to the bar, hey, party, hey, you go to Facebook, it's nauseating, okay? So now you're in recovery. How hard is it to avoid those temptations? Is it hard?
Well, I think it all depends on the stage of recovery that the person's in.
Okay, you went through it.
Yes.
How long are you clean and sober?
8 years.
Okay. Can you go to a bar and just hang?
If I have a certain reason to be there.
Well, you're going, your friend has a birthday and they're going to a bar.
So maybe I'd stop in, and maybe I'd bring a person in recovery with me if it's maybe like a family member's birthday.
Right.
I'm not going to stay there long enough to have any temptations.
Okay.
And I would probably bring someone with me. This way I have an accountability partner. But I would try to refrain from those types of settings.
You know what's really cool for me, because I don't do any drugs, and almost everybody else does. I go and they light up a joint and they're passing it around, and it comes to me and I get to say no. And they look at me like I'm crazy. But it's like, no, first of all, it was never a benefit for me. Ironically enough, I was given a half a pound of cocaine as a Christmas gift, and I flushed it down the toilet. And you know what I got from everybody I knew? Well, if you're not going to do it, why don't you sell it? Because I don't want anybody else to get involved, okay? That's the whole key, is to have less people involved in this trauma, because drugs is a trauma. Drugs and alcohol in this day and age is a trauma. Because I believe that a lot of people are dealing with emotional issues, okay? I think that's got to be a major part of what you guys deal with as a baseline for people who have addiction problems. Do you deal with anorexia, bulimia? Do you deal with that too in your facility?
We see it, absolutely. We're not a treatment center designed to treat eating disorders, but
Okay.
most clients, if they have that as their primary response, we would call it, when you take away drugs and alcohol, then the eating response shows up, right?
Okay.
But we would refer out to a proper facility that can treat that.
Okay, so let's go back to, I call admissions, I get in, and I'm going to utilize your program. What's the next step for me? Because I'm just like the normal guy out there who doesn't really know. So what do I hear? 28-day program. That's 12-step program from AA, and 28 days detox. Is 28 days enough?
Well, truly at Agape, we offer individualized care. So when you go through admissions, and let's say now you come into our program, you go through an intake process, and then you have an opportunity to meet with clinical and medical, and then those two departments are going to create the treatment plan. We never put a set timeline on it, because the way you respond could be different than how you respond and how I respond.
Did you ever fall backwards in the 8 years?
In the 8 years, no.
Okay. Did you try to get help prior to those 8 years?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And I don't want to use the word it failed, because obviously it didn't fail, because it took you to the next step. Sometimes you have to get to that next step, even though you failed or not failed, even though you stepped back. Sometimes when you step forward, you're going to step back 2 steps in order to step forward 4 steps. So was it hard to get back on track?
Well, yes. With my unresolved trauma, I had a lot of low self-esteem. And so every time as Stephanie mentioned, the opposite of addiction is connection. And every time I would come into the rooms, in some type of recovery program, I would feel like people really didn't care about me. So therefore, it was hard for me to build a connection when I've already felt distance. And I think that's why, as a therapist, I try to approach each client and make them feel welcomed, right? And start to build with them trust first, and then start to kind of sow into them, right? Plant some seeds and love them until they can love themselves.
Do you get as were you a sponsor? Are you a sponsor too?
Yes.
Okay, you sponsor?
I'm not.
Okay, so because you're a sponsor. I know I'm not a sponsor because I'm not in it, and that I am on a crisis line, as we spoke.
Sure.
You get calls in the middle of the night?
Well, yes. Sometimes I do.
Okay, and I guess you get up, you take that call, and you talk that person off the ledge, because that's what I do. And though, for the second that phone rings, it's like, oh, I can't believe I got to answer this call. To the second you get off, and oh my God, I feel so good about myself that I was able to help them. That's got to be a great feeling, to knowing people who've went through the program, okay, now call you up and talk to you, and I don't want to sound condescending, but they're like your kids, right? They're like your kids that you're proud of now, that have made it this far and are now going to live the right kind of life. That's how I kind of see it. We're at the top of our time. How do people get in touch with you? You have a website?
We do.
Which
It's agapetc.com.
Okay, how do you spell Agape?
AGAPE. And then TC like treatment center.
And the phone number's on the screen, so you get to see that. Guys, I bring people like this on because they're professionals. And it takes a village. You can't do it by yourself. I don't believe that anybody has the ability to do everything by themselves. It just doesn't happen. And an addiction is really, really strong power. Okay? Get help. Touch base with them. I'm sure if you give them a call, they'll be more than happy to answer. If you're a family member and you're having issues, call them. Maybe they can give you the path to take on what you need to do to get this under control. Because really, it's a matter of getting it under control first. And I guess you're right. It's somebody, if you have enough love for yourself, you're not going to want to be, I hate using this word, but I will. You're going to drive down one of the highways where all the drugs are sold and say to yourself, I don't want to be that in 7 years. Okay? When I first went to Florida, I'd drive down Dixie Highway in West Palm, and I'd look at all the crack addicts, and I'd say, did they say one day they were driving down Dixie Highway? I aspire to be that one day. It doesn't work that way. It just takes over total control of your life, right?
That's right.
Guys, use a professional. Always use a professional. I want to thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having us.
Justin, it was a pleasure.
Thank you for having us.
Everybody, check out Agape. We'll be right back.